Hey dev team, welcome back to Flutter with Drag. Let's carry on with this conference app. In the last episode we created our backend API, or the very basics of it. There is just one change I wanted to make, and that is in our index.ts we've got app use event. It's convention for APIs to have that as plural, so I'm just changing that to events. There's a little typo, but other than that, that's all good to go. So from our command line, we need to get that running, because what I want to do in this episode is get this working within Flutter. So let's just change to our server directory and run npm run serve, and that will get our API running for us, all good to go. Okay, so let's now get on with Flutter. We can close that down. So let's come over out of our server into our lib directory and open up the main.dart. And we've not run this yet at all, so I'm just going to run it now and ensure everything is working and set up. And there we have it, our default Flutter app up and running. Great. Let's just resize this window, don't need it that big. And we're going to start by deleting the entire lot of my app, and we're going to recreate that. And initially I'm just going to recreate this as a stateful widget. This is all going to get deleted later on. This is just for getting our API up and running and testing. So we're going to create a stateful widget called my app and get rid of this const there, and we should be good to go. We'll come back to that in a minute. I'm going to stop it all again and install the packages that we're going to be needing today, and I'll just give you the list of the packages we need now, and I'll talk about them as we go through. So add update dependencies, so you can either add this into your pubspec.yaml directly or using this extension that we're using here within VS Code. We're going to want HTTP. We're going to want JSON annotations, and we're going to want the copy with extension. That should install those three, which it has. And then as dev dependencies, we're going to need build runner, copy with extension generator, and JSON serializable. Okay, so if all's gone to plan there, you should have copy with extension gen, build runner, and JSON serializable, all under your dev dependencies. And under your dependencies, we should have a copy with extension, HTTP, and JSON annotation. Okay. So what do I want to do in my app? Well, just for now, I'm just going to return a material app, which is going to have a home of a scaffold. We'll put an app bar in. Should we put an app bar with a title of testing? Yep, why not? We'll make that constant there. And a body, which is going to be a column for now. Okay, let's decide what we're going to do. Well, in here, just for the testing, I want to be able to achieve two things by the end of this session. I want to be able to list a single event, and if I just come over, I'm just in my Cloud Firestore and I'm just copying one of the test event IDs that I've got. So we just want to be able to display that And then I also want to be able to list all the events. And once we've got that running, everything else should fall into place and become quite simple for us. Okay, so let's do this single event first. It sounds easier, and indeed it is. And so we know we're going to be getting something over the internet, so it's going to not be instant. So it's going to be a future. So in our column, we're going to have some children, and we're going to put in a future builder, because a future, we know we're going to be obtaining stuff from the internet. It's not going to be instant, so it's going to come at some point in the future. So we put it inside a future builder. The future builder will give us the context and the snapshot, and the snapshot is where our data is going to be. Now, once we have that, and remember, this is just for testing, there's a lot more stuff we need to put in here later on. In fact, all of this is going to get deleted later on. This is just for testing, so don't worry too much about if data exists and things like that. We're not too worried about that. What we do want to do is assume that we are going to get data back with no errors. And once we do, within that snapshot data, we want to put the title of the event. Now, that could be null, potentially, at this stage. So we're just going to say that if there is no title, we're going to put unknown. Now, data title, where does this come from? Well, nowhere yet. I've just made that up completely. What we need to do is have a model that represents one of these conference events. So in our lib folder, let's create a new folder called models. And in there, we're going to create a file which I'm going to call conf event.dart, conference event. Can't call it event because there's so many programming things called event, it will get very confusing. So we're going to call it conference event. So what does a conference event look like? Well, at the moment in our database, we have two things. We have an ID of the event, and we have the title of the event. We need to get ourselves a constructor for that. So we'll just generate that constructor like so. And now we need to put a lot of code in to do things such as making it copyable, so we can copy it and change things and edit things. We also want to be able to convert from JSON to JSON and stuff like that. Now, there are many different ways of doing that. In other episodes or other series on this channel, we've used plugins for VS Code. This time we're going to do something different. And we're going to use the copy-with extension and the JSON serializable extension. So what we need to do is just annotate this class with copy-with and also JSON serializable. Now, what does that do? Well, it's imported these two things for us, which is two of the packages we've done. And if we specify a part with the same name, and this is important, it needs to be the same name with a .g in it, G just stands for generated, then these packages will generate all that code for us, hopefully. So let's come back to our terminal, and we have our server running. So I'm just going to come over here on the right and create another terminal. Okay, and we're going to run Flutter hub run build runner build and give that a second. Okay, so that took a few seconds, 15 almost, but it's generated this part file for us. which has all the code in it that's needed to convert this to and from JSON and make it copyable with. We just need to add in here now static conf event from JSON. We need to remember a JSON is a map of string dynamic. JSON, and that is going to use the private function that has just been created for us, conf event from JSON. We have to specify this as a public event, as a public method, because we can't access this from outside, but we don't have to write the code, that's already created for us. So save that, and that is our model taken care of. So now in our main.dart, we can say with our future builder that what we're expecting to get back is a conf event. And now we have that title. Now it knows what that title is. Okay, so where are we going to get this from? Well, we need to specify where the future is going to come from. And that's going to have to come from some repository. And we want to be able to call something maybe like get event and pass in the event ID of the event we want to get. So let's just copy and paste that into there. Now that doesn't exist yet, and that's the bit we need to focus on now to get this to work. So back over to our lib folders, new folders, and let's create a folder called repositories. And in this, we're going to create a new file. And the first thing I'm going to create is the conference repository interface .dart. I'm doing this really for future proofing, because this will make sure that if we need to change where our data is stored, or if we change it from an API to something else, we have the same methods available to us. So I'm going to create here an abstract class, which I'm going to call I for interface conference repository. And at the moment I'm going to want one thing, and that is I'm going to want something called get event, which will take in a string, which will be the event ID, and that will return to us a conf event, except we know that that's going over the internet, it's not going to be instant, so it's going to return a future. So we're going to have a method called getEvents, which takes an event ID, and in the future it will return a conference event to us. Okay, that's all we need to do in there. Let's now create our conference event repository by creating a new file, and I'm just going to call this conf.dart. Maybe I should call it conference. I might rename that. Let's do it now. I'm going to call it conference. And I'm going to rename this interface as well to conference interface. I think that'll be better. Okay, so this is going to be a class called conference repository, and it's going to implement the conference repository interface. And straight away you can see it's red underlined because we're now missing an override. So let's create it. And you can see that we have to have this code in, this method in, otherwise this is not going to be happy. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to use the HTTP package. So we're going to import that package. And you need to be careful here because HTTP appears in a number of different places. You might be able to get it from Dart.io and all sorts of wonderful things. We need to make sure we're importing http/http.dart in that package. And we want to do that as HTTP so we can use it. In here, I'm also going to create a static constant string called API host, and that is going to be equal to the web URL of our API, which at the moment is on our local host, but because we're using an emulator, we have to make sure we put 10022. That's what Android emulators use. If you're using iOS, I think you can put localhost in there. I think that will work all right. Okay. So we need to get the event, and quite a few of our APIs will be getting stuff. So I'm actually going to create a private function that gets stuff and converts stuff to and from JSON for us. So I'm going to create a future, and I can make this a bit cleverer maybe, but for now I'm going to just set this up to return a dynamic because I'm not sure what it's going to necessarily return, but it's going to get something. It's going to be an async function, and what we're going to do is we're going to need to get a path. So in here we're going to have to take in a path, and then we're going to need to get the result. So let's say the final result equals awaiting HTTP get. Now HTTP get takes a URI, so we need to generate a URI. So I'm going to create another private function called URI and pass the path to that. So coming up just a little bit above, we're going to create a function called URI, which is going to return the URI, and it's going to take the path as a string. And it's simply going to return URI.parse the API host and the path. So the API host is from here, and the path is going to be from whatever's passed in this case get event, which we'll do in a second. Okay, once we've got that result, we know that all the results from our API are going to be in JSON. So we're going to, let's do this on the next line, return the JSON decoded of the result body. Now, warning here, we've got to put more error checking in here in the future. Make sure the network's running, make sure we haven't got a 404, page not found, all that sort of stuff. But now I'm just assuming everything is going to work smoothly and we're going to get back a body, and that's what we're going to do. Okay, so to do a lot more work here, but we're keeping it basic to start with. Okay, so finally down here in our get event, we can say the final response here is going to be await our private get function. And what path do we want to get? Well, we want to get our events, and we want to get our event ID. And I'm mixing up my speech marks. I'm using double in some, single in others. Okay, needs to be an async function. Let's put async in, and then we've got this response. Now we know that the response is going to be just one single event because that's all this API endpoint does, is it just returns that one event. So we want to return from here a conf event, except we want to do it from JSON, and we want to pass in the response. And that will return our future, that will return the conference event. And that's it. So let's save that and come back to our main.dart. And now, this is the reason I wanted to make this a stateful widget for testing, is we're going to need final conference repository, which we're going to call repository or repo. And it's going to be initialized late, but we do need to do it. So within our init state, we need to ensure that we set that repo up, and that equals a new conference repository. Eventually we're going to do all this via the block pattern, but this is just for testing. Okay, so with all that in place, we should now get a list, or we should get the title of that one event. So let's save that, pull up our emulator and run it, and let's see what happens. And there we go. It took a second, and if you saw that, it was unknown for a little bit, and then it became known. And that's because of the time it took for the network request to happen and everything to go through. But that's working, and that's perfect. We'll make that a lot nicer with circular progress indicators and all sorts of stuff later on. Okay, so that's getting our single event. What about our list of events? Well, let's come over to our conference interface, and let's copy that line, and instead of get event, we're now going to say we want to get events. That doesn't require any input, and instead of returning a conf event, it's going to return a list of conference events, and that's it. Save that out. Now our conference.dart is complaining that we're missing an override, so let's create that. And we have our override here. Okay, so it's not too dissimilar. I'm just going to copy this line from above and paste it in here. But this time we are getting the events. We don't need anything else. We're just getting the whole list of the events. Now, what are we going to be returning? Well, we're returning a list of conference events, and so we need to convert this JSON into a list. So we take our response, we take all of the items in it and map them, and we'll map them all to a data element, and we're going to use that data element and put conf event from JSON to the D. Okay, so for each of the items in this array that's going to get returned, we're going to convert it into a conference event. This is not a list. We need to convert this into a list, and to make sure it's typed properly and everything, we're going to just put at the beginning list from and wrap that, and that will convert all of this into a list. But we want it to be a specific list. We want this to be a list of conf events. And finally, we're going to return that list. And that is all we need to do. So let's come back to our main. Okay, so we've got our children, we've got our, let's move that up. We've got our single event. In fact, let's move that down. And so we need to do the same thing, but for our list. So we're going to have another future builder, and this time the future is going to be a list of conf events. The future is going to be the repo get events, and the builder is going to be something else. And in our builder, I'm going to do a just a list view. Now, I don't want this list view to appear unless we have data, so I'm just going to put if snapshot snap has data, we're going to do something, else we're going to just return an empty container. And that something we're going to do is return a list view builder. Now, list view builder takes an item count, and that will be our snapshot data dot length. And again, it might not be there, so we're just going to put a question mark in there for null safety. It is going to be there because we have checked that we've got data. In fact, we could put an exclamation mark there because we know it's there. Okay, in the item builder, we're going to have a context and an index. And in here, I'm very simply going to return text with, the text is going to be the snapshot data, which we now know exists, at the index, and it's the title. Couple of semicolons in there. This is complaining because I've missed a comma at the end of our previous one. Let's save that. And now, if we come back to our emulator and do a refresh, we get nothing. And that's possibly because we've got this error. Because we're using a list view builder inside a column, we need to just wrap the column with an expanded. And let's save that, and we can now see that we are getting our correct titles out. So there we are. That's the Flutter side of the API done. We're now able to get a single event out or a list of all our events. So the next stage is just to start decorating this and start making this look pretty. So that's what we will do in the next episode. We will start converting this now and start designing our app. Folks, if you've enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out. Hit that notification icon to know when the next episode's out, and I look forward to seeing you then. Until then, take care, folks. Bye now.